Somebody's talking about that this afternoon here, so I won't go into too much detail. But they're actually pretty good. So you can actually create fairly good applications out of those types of write once, deploy everywhere tools. Now, I'm not going to say that all the tools are good, because I personally think that some are good and some are terrible. Especially the ones that promise write once, deploy everywhere to 7 platforms. Whenever you actually have the lowest common denominator approach, you really cannot do a good job of the user experience. And I think that's some of a fundamental issue with the hybrid app approach. But nonetheless, if you look at, I listed out 3 different examples here: Diary Mobile, Wunderlist, and the University of Manitoba. These are all built out of the hybrid app approach. So, but having said all that, if you look at the University of Manitoba, while the home screen looks similar to the other university apps, it is actually not as good and not as rich in terms of the user experience. So you will have to, whenever you look at any kind of screens like this, it's impossible to judge how good the experience is. You still have to go and download them and try them out. And there's one more. So this is something that are recently, I think, gaining steam in the US web developer community, which is called the responsive web design. So what this is that you can design once of any web page and then make it work for all different kinds of devices, whether it's a computer or a smartphone or a tablet. But there's a problem with this approach. The problem is fundamentally that it does not take into consideration how much data that a user has to download. So the idea behind it is that you just design this one website and it will work for your desktop, mobile phone, and everything. So as an example, a desktop website of a New York Times homepage, typically it's about 1 megabyte or more because of the images. Well, then you bring that into the mobile, so technically you can do mobile. But then you're downloading 1 megabyte of a huge picture that is not efficient for the mobile user. Now, if wireless connectivity was always free, maybe that won't be a problem. And if everybody had an LTE network that works all the time, maybe there won't be a problem. But today, in reality, everywhere in the world, you have the data connectivity problem from a technical perspective as well as cost perspective. And as you may or may not know, the general trend in the wireless carrier industry is to charge money for every byte, right, every bit transferred. And unlimited data is no longer in the equation. So this approach, I think everybody should do something like this for all the web pages for sure, but it doesn't solve the problem of providing a mobile solution. So there are many, I think, open source options for developers, especially working, to create universities' mobile presence or a enterprise's internal mobile presence. And you may be already familiar with some of these tools, so I won't go into too much detail here, but jQuery Mobile, I think is sort of, there was a JQ Touch, and then I think jQuery Mobile is the more recent one that's gaining momentum. That's open source, and that actually is being used a lot. Senchai is another one that actually you should definitely check out all of these tools if you're interested in developing these things. But these are essentially front-end developer tools. So they bring you the ability to write once and perhaps deploy into many different platforms. PhoneGap is another one. I think RoMobile is actually using Ruby on Rails. And PhoneGap was just recently purchased by Adobe. And I think I don't know how serious they are about keeping the open source going. And I personally think that their finished product from a PhoneGap is actually not so good, but they're certainly out there for some of those things out there. I think the accelerated titanium certainly deserves that they have a much streamlined, I think, process. and it's a fancier tool. But basically, these will give you what it takes to provide a multi-platform, if you will, application development type of platform. Another one, which is not for the professionals just yet, is the Google's App Inventor. So this is something that Professor Halle Wilson at MIT was working on with Google, and it most recently came back to the MIT's Media Labs as an open source project. And this doesn't give you the professional-looking applications, but it lets an average person write his or her own mobile app using Android, of course. So there are many different tools out there, I think, that can be leveraged to either create very quick prototypes or, in many cases, develop professional-looking applications and then publishing it to the app stores. Now, the solution that we are focused on, starting with the MIT, now that actually has gone into different type of branches. But one of the branches that I'll be talking about in the next hour is about Kurogo. The Kurogo is Moodle Labs' essentially a fork of the MIT mobile platform that actually is now being used by a lot of different universities and enterprises. Another one was West Virginia, actually. There's a developer named David Olson. So he created a mobile web OSP, open source project. It's not being maintained and as rapidly, and I think he's sort of a one-person operation. But so he's actually done a really good work at the very beginning because we were at MIT, we're not ready to make the open source project more powerful, but he actually did a really good job of making it easier and easier. So that was actually a good thing, and that there are some of the universities out there using that. Oxford University has something similar called Molly Project. I think some of the other universities are actually using that particular solution. So just take a look. UCLA Mobile Framework. I think they copied the MIT's framework, and a lot of the language is similar, but they actually took in a slightly different direction. And their licensing scheme, you still have to contact them in order to actually get the code and all that, but definitely there's another one out there. And then I think the last one that we are encountering from time to time is called UMobile. It's another of those mobile frameworks out there that actually allows you to create a university presence. And of course, you can Google them all, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of information about these things. So then, after having talked about these things, then I think it's a question of, what's next? So, creating a mobile app for a university or mobile web for a university, I mean, that's already been done by hundreds of others out there in the world. So what's really next? So I think if you can go back to, let's say, 1995 or 1996, when, and I'm not sure what the age demographic is here, but back in the day when the World Wide Web was first really getting commercialized, you had people making home pages, and then the home page is white background, black text picture with a blue link, and that was it. That's a home page. And you write this HTML and you FTP up to a web server, and there we go. But then, of course, after that, things evolved very, very quickly. So then you had more interactive components. JavaScript was one of the contributing factors there. Even Adobe Flash, whether people like Adobe Flash or not, it actually made a lot of contributions there. You also had things like CMS systems, so content management systems, that allowed an average person to create content and update the content directly onto the website. You had authoring tools, like Dreamweaver was one of them. Like Microsoft purchased a company called Vermea Technologies, I think, and created Front Page. And many of these other tools then allowed, yet again, average person to create web pages and then FTP it up. So similarly, on the mobile space, I think you can kind of imagine that again, there'll be more content, that's for sure. And it's the ability to essentially create all these additional features by allowing other developers, not just the ones who are actually just a developer of that specific organization, but opening that out to the other types of people to help with the content generation and to really fully embrace a lot of these other features. And one more thing, of course, is the whole idea of personalizing the content. So before, quite frankly, many of the mobile devices were not that secure. So there was a time, actually, I think it's still deemed a little bit unsafe by some enterprise customers, but Android device. So for those of you familiar with mobile device management, so let's say I'm working at a company and I have an Android device, and I lost my Android device in a taxi cab. Oh, what do I do? Okay, so typically for a BlackBerry user, the answer was, well, I call my company up, and then they will remotely wipe the device. So I don't have to worry about the data being stolen. Okay, so that's a good concept. Well, so the same thing is now happening on the Android and the iOS, and then basically the MDM, the mobile device management, is actually what's driving this. But some of the features that I just talked about, only about a year ago, there were Android devices in the market. If you remotely wipe the Android device, on the device it says, would you like to wipe the device, yes or no? And that's not how you do, secure mobile environment. But those problems are getting solved. So as I said earlier, things are getting better and better and better. And then, what can you do to take advantage of all of these things? The other thing, of course, is the 4G. Now, there are a lot of problems with 4G. There were a lot of problems with the 3G, but it's there. And you can actually stream, high definition video off of a 4G if you can afford to do so, right? But still, you have the opportunity to create additional features and content that is actually, it was not possible 4 years ago. Just as an example, if you look at the size of the apps that are being published to the app stores, quite frankly, we were working with a client who wanted a 6 gigabyte, everything included in the app, bundled together. 6 gigabytes, how do you load that to a mobile device? Well, that certainly seems like an impossible thing. But someday, 6 gigabytes might be nothing. It could be done very fast, right? So there are many things I think that we can think about that actually will drive what's happening in the future. But the other sort of part of that, and from our perspective, from the perspective of having worked with a lot of enterprise and the universities, is that the trend today, I think in the future, is that there'll have to be a development platform that is more cohesive than just random people developing. And that's what at least the idea of having a platform for the university or having a platform for the enterprise is actually starting to formulate. So especially on the enterprise side, if you look at the bottom, there's a purple picture there, that's the MDM, that's mobile device management I mentioned earlier. Or there's MAM, mobile application management. So the concept here is, what happens if a person brings in a new device to the enterprise or university? How do you provision that? And how do you protect that? How do you ensure that no sensitive information, could be lost? And then coupled with that, how do you solve the problem of having lots and lots of different back-end systems? So that's another problem, not really related to mobile. But mobile is exposing those problems right now. Because you want to be able to build all these great apps. You want to build many different apps. But in the middle, there's app 1, app 2, app 3, app 4, app 5, app 6. All the way on the left-hand side, you have different kinds of systems on the back end. How do you bring order to this equation? You could have an ERP system. You could have a learning management solution. You could have any kind of a legacy system or enterprise custom content management system. So all of those things is now getting created. All these apps are getting created, especially in the past, I would say, 2 years, just out of desperation. I want that app done as soon as possible, and then we'll publish it, or something like that. And so the idea behind this is that if you could do that, and ignore for the moment that that's actually our version of the what we call the mobile optimized middleware. But if you could actually sort of consolidate that, then creating this and maintaining would be much easier. And especially if you can do that on an open source basis, to take advantage of all the community of developers and users out there, I think that would be really excellent. So that's what I'm going to talk about at the next hour. And wanted to sort of thank you again for coming, and I'll take some questions.
那现场就是有任何的问题都可以提出来。那我们有就是 Rita 那个 Andrew 的同事可以帮忙翻译这样。那有人到现在为止就是有没有问题可以提出来
？Yes.
In today's mobile platform, it seems commercial takes with all because I think iPhone and Android are not open source. Do you think that is it possible for in the future that we have an open source mobile operating system?
That's a really good question. My short answer would be no. And unfortunately, the short answer is no. And I think one thing that we learned is that for any platform, whether it's open or closed, to be successful in today's market, you have to have the gigantic financial resource. Because it's no longer just about making 1 million devices. It's now making 100 million devices. So if you think about all these other open source mobile platforms that are out there, you have to be very fast and very nimble, and you have to have the momentum behind it. And I would say Android is probably technically it's open source with some limitations, and that's as close as you're going to get. Otherwise, the other ones, things like Migo, things like I guess Symbian went open source after Nokia realized it really wasn't going to go anywhere. And HP just open source WebOS. And Samsung started with a Bada, which is another open source. So it was more of a style type of thing, more of a marketing push than real effort to really drive that. So the opportunity I think is there in theory, but in practice, any new mobile platform will require a lot of funding. And maybe in the past, the funding amount was maybe like tens of millions of dollars. But I think in today's world, in order to be very effective and competitive, they have to be in billions of dollars to be able to compete against not just the platform, but it's really about the manufacturers and those partners and so forth. So that's sort of my short answer. I personally do wish that it's actually the contrary, but I think in practice, that's what I've been seeing over the past few years. Any other questions? Okay.
I just want to ask that it's possible have Kuroko, right?
Yeah.
Kuroko could be hosted on the cloud, like Amazon or the cloud or any kind, because I saw that Kuroko is based on the PHP, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask this.
Yes. So the answer is yes, and we actually have been working on actually providing a Krogo on the cloud, especially for universities. There's actually, if you go to d.modellabs.com and try that out, and I'll show you the demo in the next hour, and that's very possible. We also have, we recently finished a project with Korea Telecom Research Lab. So Korea Telecom actually also has been leveraging Krogo on the cloud to come up with a very easy-to-use tool for an average person to quickly create the presence, all hosted in the cloud, and leveraging many of the features that they can provide as a carrier, so that these businesses can actually use those particular features. But I think that's really the part of the future direction. The only negative thing about the cloud, however, is that many universities and many companies don't yet want to have sensitive data on a third-party cloud. So there's a lot of hesitance. Even I don't know if you're familiar with Dropbox. Dropbox is a cloud-based storage. They recently opened up the enterprise, version of Dropbox. But many are still very skittish. But I think it's gradually winning over. In fact, many of the Google app for business, Google app for education users sort of overcame the FUD or the fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the cloud and the Google perhaps being able to see all the data. I mean, obviously that's a concern. I don't think MIT is going in that direction just yet for the email, but for the other types of cloud hosted thing, I think it's definitely cool.
Okay, so I think we can take 10 minutes break, then we can go on the second session.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, so we have coffee and snacks outside if everyone of you want to take some. Yeah, and now we have 10 minutes break. So, yeah, thank you.